The ballroom went silent so fast I could hear the HVAC kick on. 200 faces stared at the giant screen above the dance floor, friends, co-workers, my sister's in-laws in their pressed suits and pearl necklaces frozen mid-bite, mid-sip, mid-whisper. My sister's smile cracked like thin ice. On the screen, a timestamp blinked in the corner, and my mother's voice. My mother's played through the speakers in a sharp, unmistakable hiss. Don't give her the plated meal. Just hand her bread. That's all she deserves. A few people laughed at first thinking it was a joke. Then the video kept going. My sister lurched forward, eyes wild, cheeks draining of color. She grabbed for the DJ's laptop like she could physically snatch the truth out of the air. Turn it off, she screamed loud enough to make the microphone squeal. Her new husband's groomsman, some guy named Derek with a smug chin and a whiskey breath, looked like he'd been slapped. My sister's mother-in-law lowered her champagne flute so slowly the bubbles popped in the sudden quiet. My own mother sat at the head table, shoulders, stiff lips, pressed flat as if she could force her way out of accountability by sheer posture alone. And me? I stood off to the side of the stage with my hands clasped in front of me like I was waiting for a verdict. My heart was hammering, but my face stayed calm. Not because I wasn't terrified, because I'd been training for this moment my whole life. I'd been practicing silence since I was a little girl. But that night, I finally used my voice. And the reason I had to do it at my sister's wedding of all places started weeks earlier with a cream-colored envelope and my name written on it like an afterthought. It arrived on a Tuesday tucked between a credit card offer and a flyer for gutter cleaning. I was standing in my kitchen in Indianapolis, still in my scrubs, hair pulled back, feet aching from a 12-hour shift at St. Vincent. I'd just microwaved leftover chili and was trying to convince myself to eat something that wasn't a granola bar. The return address said Mom and Dad. No love, no hearts, no smiley faces. Just their last name in the same house I'd grown up in outside Dayton, Ohio. I stared at it for a long time before opening it like it might hiss at me. Inside was an invitation to my sister Alyssa's wedding. Alyssa, my older sister by 18 months, which in my family might as well have been 18 years. She'd always been the first, the pretty one, the one with potential. I'd been the other one. The spare. The invite was fancy thick paper with gold edging. Together with their families, it said. The venue was a winery near Cincinnati. The date was 3 weeks away. At the bottom in smaller print it said family speech slot reserved. Please arrive early. Reserved. Like I was a prop. My phone buzzed before I could set the invite down. Mom's name flashed on my screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, almost. Then I remembered how the last conversation ended, my mother telling me with that same clipped tone she used when she didn't want to be questioned that I was hard to love, and that's why life kept teaching me lessons. I swallowed the bitterness and answered, "Hi, Mom." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if I'd gotten home safe from work. She went straight to business like she was calling about a plumber. "You got the invitation?" I did. "Good, you'll come." It wasn't a question. "I work weekends," I said carefully. "I can request time off, but..." "It's your sister's wedding," she snapped. "You can figure it out, for once." There it was, for once. As if I'd spent 43 years floating through life, refusing to show up, refusing to care, refusing to try. In reality, I'd shown up for everything. I'd shown up for my dad's heart surgery. I'd shown up for my mother when she had shingles and couldn't be alone. I'd shown up for Alyssa's baby shower even though I was the only person there who didn't get a hug. And every time I did, they used me like a sandbag, something to lean on while they built the pretty parts of their life on higher ground. "Why do you need me there?" I asked, and I heard my own voice steady itself the way it does when I'm trying not to cry. Mom let out a small laugh, not amused, more like offended that I'd dared. "Don't be dramatic. You're her sister. People expect you." "People, always the people, always appearances." "Alyssa hasn't spoken to me in months," I said. "She's busy," Mom replied, as if I was complaining she'd forgotten to text me back. "Busy doing what? Posting engagement photos and tagging everyone but me." A pause. Then my mother's voice softened into something that sounded like reason, but I knew it was just strategy. "Listen," she said. "Alyssa wants everything perfect. She doesn't need stress. I told her you'd behave." Behave. Like I was a dog that might bite. "I'm not a problem," I said, and my chest tightened at the fact that I even had to say it out loud. Mom sighed the theatrical kind. Just come and wear something appropriate. Don't stand out. I almost laughed at that because I had spent my whole life trying not to stand out in their house. I had shrunk myself into corners, into quiet chores, into good grades no one celebrated. I'd learned to read the room before I spoke. I'd learned to swallow my feelings like pills. And still they called me difficult. Fine, I said before I could talk myself into the smarter choice. I'll come. That's better, Mom said, satisfied. And you'll say something, at the reception, something nice. About what? About family, she said. About forgiveness. About how proud you are of her. Alyssa, who once told me I was a charity case at Thanksgiving because I'd brought my own store-brand pie and no one wanted to eat it. Mom, I started. Don't ruin this, she cut in. Just don't. The line went dead. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at the invitation, the gold letters gleaming like a dare. I tried to talk myself out of going all week. I told myself I was too busy, that I didn't owe them anything, that I'd built a life without their approval and I didn't need to walk back into that old pain like a volunteer. But then something else crept in, something quiet and stubborn. I wanted closure. Not the Hallmark kind with hugs and apologies and everyone crying in soft candlelight. The real kind. The kind where I could look at them in the place where they'd always made me feel small and realize their opinion didn't own me anymore. So I requested the weekend off, drove my old Honda east through Indiana and into Ohio, and checked into a modest hotel 15 minutes from the winery. The night before the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down a navy blue dress that was simple, respectful, and intentionally unremarkable. I pinned my hair back. I wore small silver earrings. I did everything appropriate, because I had no intention of giving them ammunition. On the morning of the wedding, I arrived early like they demanded. The winery was gorgeous, whitewashed wood string lights, a pond with a little bridge people were already taking photos on. Staff in black vests hustled around arranging place settings. As I walked in, I caught the smell of rosemary chicken and fresh bread. Fresh bread. My stomach twisted. And then I saw the table. A long sweetheart table at the front, a head table for family, and behind it, near the exit doors, partially blocked by a tall, decorative plant, one lonely place setting with a plain folded napkin and a small plate. No menu card, no salad fork, no name tag. Just a plate. A server approached with a tight, uncomfortable smile and set something down like she wanted to get it over with. On the plate was a single dry piece of bread. Not even butter. And before I could process it, I heard my mother's voice behind me, sharp with satisfaction. There you go, she said. That's all you deserve. I turned slowly, and my sister Alyssa stood beside her in a white robe, hair half done, makeup flawless even at noon. She looked me up and down and smirked like she'd been waiting for this moment all morning. Pathetic, she said softly, as always. I didn't say anything right away. Not because I couldn't. Because if I opened my mouth in that moment, all the years I'd swallowed would come pouring out like hot coffee on a white tablecloth, messy, obvious, impossible to clean up. Alyssa's smirk stayed glued to her face, the kind of expression you wear when you're sure the room is on your side. My mother's eyes flicked to the server and then back to me like she was checking whether her little performance had landed. Behind them, bridesmaids moved through the hallway with garment bags and curling irons, laughing too loudly. Somewhere deeper in the building, someone tested a microphone, the sound echoing once check like a heartbeat. I looked down at the bread. It wasn't even fresh. It was the kind you leave on the counter overnight and regret in the morning. A hard, pale wedge that would crumble if you squeezed it. A server hovered nearby with a tray face tight. She looked like she wanted to say something but didn't know if she was allowed. I could tell she was older, maybe late 50s, hair in a neat bun, sensible shoes. The kind of woman who had raised kids and worked weddings long enough to know when a family was acting ugly. I'm sorry, she mouthed so quietly my mother couldn't hear. I nodded a small thank you, and then I looked back up at Alyssa. Are you done? I asked. Alyssa blinked like she hadn't expected me to speak at all. My mother's mouth tightened. Don't start, she warned. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. That was the thing they never understood about me. I could be angry without being loud. I'm not starting anything, I said. I just want to know where I'm supposed to sit. My mother pointed toward the lonely place setting near the exit. There, out of the way. Out of the way. Like I was a chair someone forgot to fold up. I felt something in my chest shift, not break, not crumble, just click into place, like a door finally shutting on a room I'd spent too many years trying to decorate. Okay, I said. Alyssa's smirk faltered again. She wanted tears. She wanted me to beg. She wanted me to do something embarrassing so she could justify the cruelty. But I didn't give her that. I picked up the plate with the bread and carried it to the table my mother had assigned me, weaving through the staff and floral arrangements like I belonged there. The table was half hidden by a potted ficus, and positioned near the restroom hallway close enough to the exit that I could leave without anyone noticing. Of course. I set the plate down and sat smoothing my navy dress over my knees. Around me, the winery buzzed with pre-ceremony energy. People in suits and summer dresses chatted at high-top tables. Someone adjusted a boutonniere. A little girl in a pale pink dress twirled until her mother told her to stop. I watched it all like I was behind glass, because I'd been here before in a way. Not at a winery, not at a wedding, but in the same emotional room where my role was to be small so someone else could feel big. The ceremony itself was outside by the pond. I took a seat in the far back behind a group of Alyssa's co-workers. They laughed about the open bar like it was the main event. The officiant talked about love and partnership and two families becoming one, and I almost laughed at the irony my family couldn't even be kind to its own blood. Alyssa walked down the aisle in a lace gown that probably cost more than my first car. My mother dabbed her eyes dramatically. My father stood stiff in his suit, expression unreadable. Dad had always been quieter, less cruel on the surface, but silence can be its own kind of betrayal. He'd watched my mother and Alyssa cut me down for decades and called it keeping the peace. When Alyssa said I do, the guests cheered. I clapped politely because I'm not a monster. I don't hate weddings. I don't even hate my sister in the purest sense. I hated what she did when she felt powerful. I hated the way my mother fed it. After the ceremony, everyone moved inside for the reception. Staff directed people toward their assigned tables with little cards and smiles. A jazz trio played near the bar. The air smelled like wine perfume and roasted chicken. And bread. Good bread. I saw baskets of it on tables, warm rolls with butter-sliced sourdough crusty baguettes. My stomach growled, but my pride held the line. At my table, if you could call it that, I sat alone. No one stopped to ask why. They either didn't notice or didn't care. Honestly, most people at weddings are too wrapped up in their own conversations to question the seating chart. Except, of course, my family. My mother passed by with Alyssa's new mother-in-law, a tall woman in a green dress with diamond studs in her ears. They paused near me like they'd stumbled upon a stain on the carpet. "Oh," the mother-in-law said, forcing a smile. "You must be Alyssa's sister." "Yes," I said. My mother jumped in quickly. "This is Nora." I gave a small nod. "Nice to meet you." The woman glanced at my empty place, setting no salad, no wine glass, just the plate with the bread. Her eyebrows lifted. My mother laughed lightly. "Nora has a delicate stomach. She asked for something simple." I stared at my mother, amazed at how easily she lied. Not to protect me, to protect herself. The mother-in-law hesitated, clearly not convinced, but then Alyssa appeared behind them in her reception dress, radiant and buzzing from attention. "There you are," she said, like she'd forgotten I existed and just remembered I was useful. Her eyes skimmed my plate. "Aw, you still have it." I didn't respond. Alyssa leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Don't be weird today, Nora. Okay, Jason's family is watching. Mom told me you've been sensitive lately." Sensitive. That was their favorite word for not willing to be abused quietly. "I'm not being weird," I said. "Good," Alyssa replied, and she smiled wide for a passing camera, turning her face into a mask. "Because we're doing speeches after dinner. Mom wants you to say something. Short, sweet. Don't make it about you." Then she walked away before I could answer. My hands were steady on my lap, but inside my thoughts churned. Speeches after dinner. That meant the microphone, the DJ booth, the projector screen they'd set up on the far wall for the slideshow of childhood photos. A screen big enough for everyone to see. A screen I had looked at earlier while staff tested it. I'd noticed the ports on the side, HDMI, USB. I'd noticed the laptop on the DJ's table. I'd noticed because when you grow up like I did, you learn to notice exits, weaknesses, and opportunities. Dinner was served. People laughed over glasses of Pinot Noir. Plates of salmon and chicken went by. At my table, nothing came. A server approached again, the same older woman from earlier, and this time she didn't look away. "Ma'am," she said gently, glancing toward the head table, "we can bring you a plate. There's plenty." Before I could answer, my mother's voice cut through from behind her. "No," Mom said sharply. "She's fine." The server's jaw tightened. "It's not an issue," she insisted. "We have extra meals." My mother smiled like a snapped rubber band. I said, "She's fine." The server looked at me, eyes apologetic, and I saw something else there too, anger. Solidarity. The silent recognition that this wasn't normal. I gave her a small shake of my head. Not because I didn't want food, because I didn't want to give my mother the satisfaction of seeing me accept charity in front of everyone. "I'm fine," I said. The server lingered a second, then whispered, "If you change your mind, find me." She walked away, and I sat there with my bread and my water, listening to laughter float over from the other tables. It felt surreal, like I was watching a party in someone else's life. Then the DJ's voice came through the speakers. "All right, everybody, if we could get your attention, time for speeches." Chairs scraped. People turned. Glasses clinked. The room focused toward the head table. My mother rose, first napkin in hand, face glowing with pride. Alyssa squeezed her arm. And then my mother looked straight at me across the room, lifted her chin, and made a small beckoning motion with her fingers. "Come here. Take your place. Be the good sister. Be the prop." I took a slow breath, and in that moment I felt the weight of the USB drive in my purse like a heartbeat. I stood. Not rushing, not trembling, just standing like someone who had finally decided she was done being moved around. And as I started walking toward the microphone, I heard my sister whisper just loud enough for the people near her to laugh. "Let's see what she does, she always cracks." I didn't crack. I kept walking. The microphone felt heavier than it looked. Not physically, though, the metal was cool and solid in my hand, but because I could feel 200 sets of expectations pressing down on it like a lid. Alyssa sat at the head table with her new husband, Jason, their fingers laced together, her smile still on like she'd glued it in place. My mother stood beside the DJ booth, clutching a champagne flute like a trophy, watching me, the way a stage manager watches an actor who tends to miss cues. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the tablecloth as if it might tell him what to do. The DJ leaned toward me. "You're Alyssa's sister, right, Nora? Just speak into the mic and we'll—" "I know," I said softly. My voice sounded calm. I was grateful for that. People assume calm means unbothered. Sometimes it's just controlled. I looked out at the crowd. The room smelled like wine and roasted meat and sugar from the cake table. The string lights overhead made everything look warm and forgiving, like this was a place where families came to celebrate, not wound each other. I could see the side screen behind me already glowing with the first photo in the slideshow, Alyssa, as a little girl in pigtails, my mother holding her like she was made of glass. My mother's voice had been so clear earlier, cutting through the speakers in my head. "That's all you deserve." The bread, the smirk, the way they'd watched for me to break. I tightened my grip on the microphone and forced myself to take a breath that went all the way down. This right here was the moment my mother wanted. A neat little speech that would polish the image of our family for Jason's relatives. Something about love and forgiveness and how wonderful Alyssa was. If I did it, I'd prove I could be useful without being valued. If I didn't, I'd be the villain again. I cleared my throat. The room quieted a little more. Someone in the back coughed into their napkin. "Hi," I began, and my voice came through the speakers, steady and low. "I'm Nora, Alyssa's sister." Alyssa's smile widened as if she'd won a point. My mother's shoulders loosened just slightly, the way they do when she thinks she's regained control. I paused. Not for drama, for myself. For the part of me that had spent years apologizing for taking up air. Because the truth was, I hadn't driven 3 hours from Indianapolis, taken off work, and stood here with a dry piece of bread in my stomach just to be decorative. I'd come because something in me finally wanted the story told accurately. Not the version my mother repeated to neighbors. Not the version Alyssa posted on social media with filters and captions about toxic people while ignoring her own behavior. The real version. A memory rose up so sharply I could almost taste it. I was 12. Alyssa was 13. It was Thanksgiving at our house, and my mom had made a big deal of the table gold napkin rings, fancy glasses, a centerpiece she'd copied from a magazine. Alyssa got a new dress. I got a hand-me-down sweater that itched. When dinner started, my mother put the biggest slice of turkey on Alyssa's plate. Then she looked at mine and frowned like it offended her. She scraped the last bits from the pan and dropped them onto my plate like she was feeding a stray. Alyssa smiled at me across the table and said loud enough for our aunt to hear, "Nora doesn't need more. She's already sturdy." Everyone laughed. My mother laughed too. My father didn't. He just kept eating. Later that night, I stood in the bathroom and stared at my face in the mirror, red-eyed and hot with shame, and I promised myself something. One day you'll leave. One day you'll have a life that doesn't require their approval. It took me longer than I want to admit, but I did leave. I put myself through nursing school with loans and night shifts, and the kind of exhaustion that turns time into a blur. I moved to Indianapolis because it was far enough away to breathe, but close enough that I could still show up when they demanded it. And I did. I showed up for everything. When Mom had shingles, I drove out after work and stayed the weekend. When Dad had his heart scare, I sat in a hospital chair for 12 hours and fetched coffee and listened to my mother complain about parking. When Alyssa had her first baby, I mailed gifts and texted congratulations and never got a thank you. I told myself I was being the bigger person. But the older I got, the more I realized being the bigger person had become my family's favorite way to keep me small. I blinked hard and refocused on the crowd. They were waiting. They didn't know what kind of sister I was supposed to be in this story. I could feel my purse hanging at my side, the thin strap digging into my palm. Inside was my phone, my keys, and the USB drive wrapped in a tissue like it was fragile. I hadn't planned it for months like some movie villain. It wasn't that clean. The idea had started as a knot in my stomach after the invitation arrived, the same old feeling that I was being summoned, not welcomed. Then Mom called and told me to behave and not stand out, and something in me snapped into clarity. So I did what I always do when my emotions get too loud. I gathered facts. It started small. I searched old text threads, scrolling back through years of conversations where Alyssa's cruelty wasn't even subtle if you knew how to look. I found messages from my mother telling me I was ungrateful for not driving out more even when I was working double shifts. I found voicemails where she sighed and said, "Why can't you just be normal like your sister?" Then, on a whim, I opened my email and typed in the name of a loan officer from years ago, someone who'd helped me consolidate my student loans. There it was, a chain from a decade earlier. My mother had co-signed with the promise she'd help while I got on my feet. Then she'd pulled out when Alyssa wanted a down payment on a townhouse. The email wasn't just financial, it was proof. Dates, promises, excuses, a pattern. The more I looked, the more I saw the same thing over and over, not one big betrayal, but 1,000 small ones that had been dressed up as family. And then last week, Alyssa had texted me out of nowhere after months of silence. "Make sure you wear something plain. Don't embarrass me. Mom says you've been acting weird." Acting weird. As if setting boundaries was a symptom. I'd stared at that message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. My first instinct was to apologize, to smooth it over, to keep peace. But then I imagined myself at her wedding, shoved into the corner like a shadow. And I thought no. So I called my friend Marisol, who works IT at the hospital, and asked a question I never thought I'd ask. If I have a video file, how do I make sure it plays on a projector without internet? Marisol didn't ask why, she just said, "Bring it over." I recorded a short video on my phone, just my screen, as I opened messages, played voicemails, scrolled through emails. Proof with timestamps. Proof that couldn't be brushed off as Nora being dramatic. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw cake. I wasn't going to fight anyone in a parking lot. I was going to let their own words speak in front of the people they cared so much about impressing. And now here I was, at the microphone, with everyone watching. I swallowed once and glanced toward the DJ's laptop. He had the slideshow cued, ready to keep the night sparkling and shallow. My mother smiled at me like she was sure I'd play my part. Alyssa lifted her champagne glass in a tiny toast smug. And in that moment, I made the decision fully, not in anger, but in certainty. I raised the microphone again. "I just want to say, I began, and the room leaned in. Then I shifted my purse higher on my shoulder and took one small step toward the DJ booth. I just want to say, congratulations, I finished, forcing the words out like a peace offering. Alyssa relaxed immediately, like she'd been holding her breath, and didn't even realize it. My mother's smile grew brighter, the satisfied kind. The crowd gave the polite "ah" sound that always follows a wedding speech kickoff. I kept my gaze soft, my shoulders stayed loose, I let my voice warm. "You look beautiful tonight, Alyssa," I said, and it wasn't even a lie. She did look beautiful, she always did, because she knew exactly how to build an image. Alyssa's eyes glittered as if she'd won. "And Jason," I continued, turning slightly toward him, "welcome to the family." Jason nodded with a polite grin. I didn't know him well. What I knew was what Alyssa had told people: he was steady, successful, the kind of man who knows what he wants. He had a decent job, a clean haircut, and the faintly smug posture of a guy who thought he'd earned everything he had. He had no idea what he'd married into. "I'm going to keep this short," I said, and a few people chuckled in relief. My mother's shoulders dropped, fully relaxed now. She believed the danger had passed. I let the silence hang for half a second, just enough to feel the room settle, and then I added, "But before I sit down, I prepared something special." The reaction was immediate. A few oohs, a couple of claps. Someone near the bar said, "A video." Alyssa's smile stayed, but her eyes narrowed a fraction. She didn't like surprises unless she controlled them. My mother stiffened just slightly. She leaned toward Alyssa and whispered something I couldn't hear, but I saw Alyssa's jaw tighten. I took 2 steps toward the DJ booth, still holding the mic, still smiling like I belonged in this role. The DJ, a guy in his late 20s with gelled hair and a headset mic, leaned forward. "Oh, you've got something. We're about to run the childhood slideshow, but we can—" "It'll only take a minute," I said. He hesitated. "Is it on your phone? We can AirPlay?" "No," I said softly. "No internet needed." I reached into my purse and pulled out the USB drive. It was small and plain, the kind you can buy in a pack of 5 at Target. No label, no drama. Just a tiny piece of plastic that carried years of truth. The DJ's eyebrows lifted. Okay." Behind me, Alyssa's chair scraped slightly against the floor. She was sitting up straighter now. My mother's face had gone more rigid, the smile not reaching her eyes anymore. "What is that?" my mother called out, laughing too loudly. "Nora, don't." "It's just something special," I said, still into the microphone, still calm. I could feel the whole room paying attention now. People loved the idea of a surprise at a wedding. They expected something sweet, maybe a montage of me and Alyssa growing up, maybe a heartfelt message from someone who couldn't attend. They didn't expect anything else. The DJ turned his laptop toward me slightly. I could see the slideshow file open, a list of photos and transitions. The projector hummed softly, casting light onto the large screen. "Just plug it in," he asked. "Yes." My hand was steady as I inserted the USB. I'd rehearsed the movement twice in my hotel room, not because I thought I'd mess it up, but because I needed to feel what it was like to do it without shaking. Alyssa stood up now, not fully panicked yet, but alert. "Nora," she said, her voice sharp but controlled. "What are you doing?" I turned my head slightly toward her, still smiling like a good sister. "Something special," I repeated. My mother was on her feet too, champagne flute abandoned on the table. "This isn't the time," she snapped. "You're not going to hijack." I held up one finger, the universal signal of 1 second, and the crowd laughed a little, thinking it was playful. The DJ clicked. A file folder opened on the laptop. He scrolled through. There it was, special for Alyssa MP4. Marisol had told me to name it something obvious so I wouldn't get flustered. I'd almost laughed at the simplicity of it. "Okay," the DJ said, "this is a video. Should I just—" "Yes," I said, and my voice came out gentle, almost tender. "Play it." The DJ hit spacebar. For the first second, the screen went black. The room quieted in anticipation, the way it does right before a surprise gift is unwrapped. Then the video began. It was my phone screen, recorded in close-up, bright and clear. At the top of the screen was a text thread labeled "Mom." I hadn't added music, no dramatic edits, no narration, just raw, unfiltered evidence. The first message appeared large enough to read from across the room. "Mom, don't give her the plated meal, just hand her bread, that's all she deserves." A ripple went through the crowd, confusion then laughter from a few people who thought it was a joke. Alyssa's face twitched. My mother froze like someone had poured ice water down her spine. The video continued scrolling down. Mom. She always makes everything about herself. Keep her in the corner. Don't let her talk too long. Then Alyssa's name popped up in the thread. Alyssa LOL. Brett is perfect. She'll look so sad. Make sure someone takes a picture. The laughter died. You could hear the jazz trio stop mid-song like even they sensed something had shifted. A man at a nearby table muttered, "What the hell?" Alyssa's hand flew to her mouth, not in shock but in calculation, like she was already scrambling for a way to spin this. My mother's eyes snapped to me, pure fury flashing through her careful mask. "Turn it off," she hissed, and it came through the microphone because I was still holding it. That hiss, thin sharp, made the room lean in even more. The video kept playing. It jumped to a voicemail recording. The screen showed my thumb pressing play. Then my mother's voice filled the speakers again, unmistakable. "You always ruin things, Nora. You're hard to love. You know that hard, too, love." A woman near the front sucked in a breath. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." I could feel my own heart pounding, but I kept my face still. I kept my shoulders square. I didn't want anyone to see me as the emotional mess my mother had always painted me to be. I wanted them to see the truth that cruelty looks ugly no matter who wears it. Alyssa's chair toppled backward as she lunged toward the DJ booth. Her heels clicked fast on the floor, frantic. "Turn it off," she screamed louder now, raw and desperate. Jason stood halfway, eyes wide. "Alyssa, what is this?" My sister didn't even look at him. She reached for the laptop with both hands like she could grab the video and crush it. The DJ recoiled. "Whoa, ma'am." Alyssa's fingers fumbled for keys, for buttons, for any way to stop it. But Marisol had shown me something else. The file was set to autoplay full screen through a separate media player. Even if she closed the window, it would keep running for a moment before stopping. Long enough for the next part to hit. And it did. The screen shifted to an email chain. My mother's email address at the top. A subject line, loan cosign, update. My mother's words highlighted in yellow. "I'm not helping her anymore. Alyssa needs it more. Nora will figure it out. She always does." A low collective sound moved through the room like a wave of discomfort. Alyssa's face went pale. The smirk was gone, replaced by panic that made her look younger, smaller, exposed. She turned toward the crowd, hands up like she was pleading with them. This is out of context. She's crazy. She's always been." "Turn it off," she shrieked again, voice cracking. And for the first time in my life, the room didn't follow her lead. No one laughed. No one clapped along. 200 people just stared, and in that stare was something Alyssa had never had to face before. Consequences. For a moment, no one moved. Not the guests, not the DJ, not even the staff hovering near the bar with trays half lifted in their hands. It was like the room itself had forgotten how to breathe. The screen glowed behind me, bright and unforgiving. Alyssa stood frozen near the DJ booth, one heel twisted awkwardly beneath her mouth open like she was about to argue her way out of this, like she always did. My mother was still at the head table, hands braced against the edge, her face pulled tight with something that looked dangerously close to fear. Not embarrassment. Fear. The video kept playing. The next clip was another voicemail. The timestamp was from 2 years earlier. I remembered exactly where I'd been when I saved it, sitting in my car after a 12-hour shift, hands shaking, too tired to cry. My mother's voice poured through the speakers again, sharp and dismissive. "If you'd just stop being so difficult, people would want you around. Alyssa doesn't have these problems. Maybe you should learn from her." A man near the back muttered, "Jesus." Someone else whispered, "That's her mother." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see their faces to know what was happening. I could feel it the way the air shifted when the truth finally landed and didn't bounce off. Alyssa spun toward me, eyes wild. "You planned this," she said, her voice cracking into the microphone I was still holding. "You planned this to humiliate me." I met her gaze calmly. For the first time, I didn't flinch. "No," I said, and my voice echoed clearly through the room. "I planned this so I wouldn't be lied about anymore." The guests leaned in. Phones stayed down. No one filmed. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something heavier. The video moved on to text messages, screenshots stacked one after another. Alyssa, don't invite her to the engagement party. She'll kill the vibe. Mom agreed, she always does. Alyssa, put her in the back at the wedding. I don't want her in photos. Mom, done. A soft gasp rippled through the front tables. Jason finally stepped fully away from Alyssa, his face pale, jaw clenched. You said she didn't want to be involved, he said quietly. You said she didn't care. Alyssa whipped toward him. Jason, this isn't. Is this real? He asked louder now. Did you say this? She opened her mouth. Closed it. My mother straightened suddenly, her voice sharp and defensive. This is private family business, she snapped. You had no right. I raised my hand, not aggressively, just enough to stop her. I'm not sharing secrets, I said. I'm correcting a story. I nodded slightly toward the screen. The final clip began. It was short. Just 30 seconds. My phone recording my own face this time, tired but steady. I'm not doing this for revenge, my voice said from the speakers. I'm doing it so I can stop carrying this alone. If you're watching this, it means I finally decided not to protect people who never protected me. The video ended. The screen went dark. No music rushed in to save the moment. No polite applause followed to smooth it over. The silence was absolute. 200 guests sat perfectly still. My sister's wedding, the day she'd spent a year curating for appearances, had been stripped bare not by yelling or drama, but by receipts. Alyssa's face drained of color. She looked smaller somehow, like the confidence that usually wrapped around her had evaporated under the heat of exposure. Turn it back on, she whispered, voice trembling now, not angry anymore, afraid. Turn it back on, I can explain. No one moved. Jason stared at the dark screen, then at Alyssa, then finally at me. His voice was low, stunned. Is any of this not true? Alyssa swallowed hard. Her eyes flicked to my mother, desperate. My mother didn't meet her gaze. Instead, my mother looked at me. For the first time in my life, she looked at me like she didn't know me at all. And that more than the humiliation, more than the guests, more than the ruined wedding was what finally cracked something in her. This was unnecessary, she said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. You always take things too far. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. A woman at the nearest table shook her head slowly, not at me, but at my mother. I felt my chest tighten, but not with pain, with relief. I stepped fully back to the microphone. I'm done, I said simply. I didn't come here to ruin anything. I came here to stop pretending. I turned, slightly addressing the room instead of my family. I was given a piece of dry bread tonight, I continued, my voice steady. Not because of allergies, not by accident, but as a message. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I've received that message my whole life, I said, and I accepted it for far too long. I looked at Alyssa, then my mother, then my father, who was finally looking at me now, eyes glassy shame written plainly across his face. But I don't accept it anymore. I set the microphone gently back on its stand. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't look back. As I walked away from the DJ booth, the room parted without anyone meaning to, like water moving around something solid. I passed tables where people avoided my eyes, not because they blamed me, but because they didn't know what to say. Near the exit, the older server caught my arm lightly. Good for you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You deserved better. I nodded, unable to trust my voice just yet. Behind me, I heard Jason say Alyssa's name again, this time, not with confusion, but with something colder. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool evening air. The winery lights glowed behind me, warm and distant like another life. I took a deep breath. For the first time in decades, my lungs felt full. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped carrying their silence as my own. I made it to the parking lot before my hands started to shake. It wasn't the cold, though the October air in southern Ohio had a bite to it. It was the adrenaline finally draining out of me, leaving my body to process what my mind had been holding back. I stood beside my old Honda keys in my hand, staring at the rows of SUVs and rental cars and polished sedans, like they belonged to people who had tidy families and normal arguments. Somewhere inside the winery, my sister's wedding was still technically happening. Music might even start up again. People might pretend the whole thing was a misunderstanding, something to laugh about later over brunch. That's what my family did best, paint over rot. I forced my fingers to stop trembling long enough to unlock my car. When I slid into the driver's seat, the interior smelled faintly like hand sanitizer and the peppermint gum I always kept in the console. I set my purse on the passenger seat and stared straight ahead, breathing slow, counting each inhale the way my therapist taught me years ago. Yes, therapist. Because growing up in my house meant you either learned to numb out or you learned to heal with help. I didn't even turn the key before someone knocked sharply on my window. I flinched and looked up. My father stood outside, his suit jacket, unbuttoned tie loosened. His hair, always neatly combed, looked slightly disheveled, like he'd run his hands through it too many times. I rolled down the window halfway. Dad. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. His eyes were wet, but he blinked quickly as if tears were some kind of weakness he couldn't afford. Get out, he said quietly. Please, just for a minute. I considered saying no. I considered driving away and letting the night end right there, clean and final. But closure isn't always clean. I opened the door and stepped out, shutting it behind me. The parking lot was lit by tall lamps that made everything look pale and exposed. In the distance, I could hear muffled music starting again inside. Someone had decided the party needed saving. Dad shoved his hands into his pockets, shoulders hunched like he was cold even in his thick suit. I didn't know, he said finally. I let out a humorless breath. You didn't know Mom told them to give me bread? His face tightened. No, not that. I didn't know it was that bad. I stared at him. Dad, you lived in the same house. He swallowed hard, eyes dropping to the gravel. You're right, he said. I saw things. I heard things. I told myself it wasn't that serious, that you were strong, that you could handle it. There it was, the excuse that had kept me quiet for years. You thought because I didn't scream it didn't hurt, I said. He flinched. I thought you were tougher than Alyssa. That was the cruelest compliment in our family. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my voice level. Tough isn't the same as okay. Dad nodded slowly, shame settling over him like a coat. I know. We stood there in silence for a beat, the only sound the distant thump of bass from inside, and the occasional crunch of gravel as another guest crossed the lot. Finally, Dad looked up. Jason's furious, he said. I didn't respond. That wasn't my problem anymore. Alyssa is losing it, he continued. She says you ruined her life. Your mother's saying you're unstable. She's telling people you've always been jealous. Jealous? Of what? The right to be treated like a human being? I exhaled slowly. Of course she is. Dad's eyes shined again. Nora, why now? Why at the wedding? The question wasn't angry. It was genuinely bewildered, like he couldn't understand why I'd chosen the one day that mattered to them. And that told me everything. Because it's the only day she couldn't hide, I said quietly. It's the only day Mom couldn't spin it behind closed doors. They care about what people think more than they care about what they do. So I brought the truth to the people. Dad rubbed his face with one hand. Your mother's embarrassed. I laughed once, short and sharp. Good. He winced. Nora. Dad, I said softer now because despite everything he was still my father. I'm not proud of hurting anyone, but I am proud of stopping the lie. Dad stared at me, then nodded slowly. I understand. That was new. Not full support, but understanding. I hadn't heard that word from him in years. Then he looked toward the winery doors where a cluster of guests stood whispering and glancing toward the parking lot. People are leaving, he said. Jason's father pulled him aside. Alyssa's mother-in-law, she's asking questions. I didn't gloat, I didn't smile. I just felt tired. Did Mom say anything? I asked quietly. Dad hesitated. She's saying you're sick, he admitted, that you've been unwell for years and she's tried to help you. My jaw tightened, of course. He looked pained, but some people aren't buying it. I raised an eyebrow. That server, Dad said, surprising me, the older one. She told Jason's aunt that she watched your mother instruct staff not to serve you. She said it was cruel. My chest warmed slightly at that, the idea that anyone had witnessed it and named it for what it was. What do you want from me, Dad? I asked finally, because I could feel this conversation circling around something he was afraid to say. He swallowed. Come back inside, he said, voice strained. Just talk. To them, to your mother. Maybe you can calm it down. There it was. Even now, after the truth had been shown, my role was still to manage their mess, to smooth the edges, to make it easier for them to save face. I shook my head slowly. No. Dad's shoulders sagged. Nora, please, she's your mother. I met his eyes, and I'm her daughter. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. She's not sorry, I continued. If she was sorry, she'd come out here herself. She'd say it, not hide behind you. Dad's mouth opened, then closed. He couldn't deny it. I can't go back in, I said gently. Not tonight. Not like that. Dad stared at the gravel again, then nodded slowly, defeated. Okay. For a moment, we just stood there in the cold, two people connected by blood and history and a million things unsaid. Then Dad reached into his pocket and pulled out something small in envelope. I wasn't going to give you this, he said, voice cracking. Your mother would be furious. He held it out. I took it cautiously. What is it? He looked away. It's a check from me. Not your mother, not Alyssa, just me. I stared at him stunned. It's not guilt money, he rushed. It's money I should have given you years ago. For school, for help, for anything. I kept telling myself you didn't need it, that you were fine. My throat tightened so hard I could barely breathe. Dad, I whispered. He shook his head. Take it, or don't. But I needed you to know. I see it now. I see what we did. That word hit me harder than the check. Not because it made it okay, because it meant he was finally stepping out of denial. I slipped the envelope into my purse without looking at the amount. Thank you, I said softly. But this isn't about money. I know, he said, and his voice broke on the last word. I know. A sharp voice cut through the air. Of course it's about money. My mother. She strode across the parking lot toward us, heels sinking slightly into the gravel, her face rigid with fury and humiliation. Her lipstick was perfect. Her eyes were not. She pointed at my purse like it offended her. What is that? What did you just take from him? Dad stiffened. Linda, stop. She ignored him, eyes locked on me. You couldn't wait, could you? Always the victim. Always taking. I felt my body go strangely calm again, the adrenaline returning like a shield. I didn't ask for anything, I said evenly. My mother laughed bitterly. You asked for attention. You asked for drama. You asked to ruin your sister's wedding because you're jealous and selfish. No, I said louder now, not yelling but firm. I asked to be treated like a person. And you refused. My mother's nostrils flared. After everything I've done for you. What have you done, I asked, and the question landed in the cold air like a stone. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Because she couldn't list love, she couldn't list support, she could only list control. Dad stepped forward. Linda, he said quietly enough. My mother snapped toward him. Don't you start too. Then she turned back to me, eyes glittering with rage. You don't get to come back after all these years and act righteous. I'm not acting, I said. I'm finally telling the truth. Her voice rose sharp. You humiliated me in front of strangers. I held her gaze. You humiliated me in front of my whole life. The words hung between us, heavy and undeniable. And for the first time, my mother didn't have a comeback. She stood there breathing hard, and I saw something I hadn't seen in her before. Uncertainty. Not remorse. But the realization that her control had limits. I took a step back toward my car keys still in my hand. I'm leaving, I said. My mother's voice dropped low and venomous. If you walk away, don't come back. I paused, hand on the car door. Then I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized something that felt like freedom. I already did, I said quietly. I got in the car, shut the door, and started the engine. Dad stepped back, eyes wet, and my mother stood in the headlights like a statue, her shadow stretching long across the gravel. As I pulled out of the parking lot, the winery receded behind me, lights twinkling like a lie. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was finally going home to myself. I drove with the radio off. The highway was dark and mostly empty, the kind of late-night stretch where the headlights carve out a small tunnel of visibility, and everything else is unknown. Cornfields blurred past. Exit signs for small towns I'd never stopped in Lebanon, Wilmington, flashed green and disappeared. My hand stayed steady on the wheel, but my mind kept replaying the night in fragments, the bread on the plate, Alyssa's smirk, my mother's voice booming through the speakers like a confession, my father's wet eyes in the parking lot. And underneath all that, something quieter. Relief. Not the triumphant kind you see in movies where revenge feels like fireworks. This was different. This was the kind of relief that comes when you've been holding your breath for years and finally exhale shaky and honest. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at it at the next red light, an unknown number. I ignored it. 2 minutes later it buzzed again. Same number. Then a third time. I pulled into a gas station off I-71, the bright fluorescent lights making the whole place feel stark and unreal. I parked, turned off the engine, and finally answered. Hello? There was a long pause, then a woman's voice measured firm. This is Carol Winslow, she said. Jason's mother. My stomach tightened. Hi. I hope I'm not calling too late, she continued, but her tone made it clear she didn't care if it was late. I got your number from your father. He said you were already on the road. Yes, I said. My voice was careful. I'm heading back to Indianapolis. Another pause. I could hear muffled noise in the background, people talking, dishes clinking. The wedding was still going, or at least the attempt at it. I want you to know Carol said I don't approve of ambushes. My chest clenched, and for a second I felt the old instinct to apologize rise up, automatic trained. But I held it down. Okay, I said simply. Carol exhaled. However, I also don't approve of cruelty, and what I saw tonight was cruelty. My throat tightened. I've been married 32 years, she continued. I raised 2 sons. I've sat through enough family drama to recognize a pattern. Your mother, your sister, they weren't just unkind, they were deliberate. I swallowed, yes. I want to ask you something, Carol said. That bread, was that truly what they served you? I stared at the dashboard. Even now the question made my stomach twist. Yes. And the staff were told not to serve you dinner, she pressed. Yes. Carol went quiet. Then she said Jason is devastated. I pictured Jason's face when the video played, confusion turning into anger. He hadn't looked like a bad man, just a man who didn't know the truth. Is he okay? I asked, surprising myself. He's furious, Carol said. And embarrassed. And most of all, he feels lied to. He asked Alyssa 3 times whether those messages were real. She tried to blame you, then she tried to blame your mother. Now she's saying you hacked her phone. I let out a tired breath. I didn't. I know, Carol said, brisk. I watched the timestamps. I watched the threads. I watched your mother's face when the voicemail played. That wasn't the face of someone being framed. I closed my eyes briefly. Carol's voice softened just a fraction. I'm calling because I need to understand. Not for gossip, for my son. What do you want to know? I asked. Is there any chance, Carol said carefully, that your mother will admit what she did? Or will she keep rewriting the story until everyone else doubts reality? I almost laughed, but it came out more like a sigh. She'll rewrite it, I said. That's how she survives. Carol hummed as if she'd already suspected. Then we have a bigger problem, she said. What kind of problem? Because if Alyssa won't be honest, Carol said, and your mother keeps feeding her excuses, my son is going to have to decide whether he's married to Alyssa or married to Alyssa and her mother. The way she said it plain practical made my skin prickle. That's between them, I said. Yes, Carol agreed, but it affects you too. Because I have a feeling your sister will try to make you the villain in Jason's family. I'm not going to allow that. My heart thumped. Why? Carol's voice was firm. Because it's wrong, and because I don't raise my sons to stay blind for the sake of appearances. I thought of my father who had stayed blind for decades. Thank you, I said quietly. Carol paused. Nora, she said, and hearing my name in her mouth spoken like I mattered made my throat burn. What you did tonight wasn't pretty, but it was honest. And honesty sometimes makes a mess before it makes a path. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to ruin anything. I know, Carol said, but your mother and sister ruined it long before you ever played a video. For a moment I couldn't speak. Then Carol added, one more thing. That server Martha, she's writing a statement about what she was instructed to do. She was furious. She said she's worked weddings 20 years and she's never been told to starve a guest. My chest tightened, a strange mix of vindication and sadness. She shouldn't get in trouble. She won't, Carol said. And if your mother tries to threaten her, she'll regret it. We ended the call, and I sat in my car in the gas station parking lot, staring at the fluorescent glow, feeling something shift inside me again. Not rage. Support. It was unfamiliar, like trying on a coat in a size you didn't think you deserved. I drove the rest of the way home in quiet. The next morning, my apartment looked exactly the same as I'd left it: laundry basket in the corner, coffee mug in the sink, my work shoes by the door. Ordinary life. Safe life. I showered, put on sweats, and made coffee I barely tasted. Then my phone started buzzing again. This time it was my father. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered, because part of healing is choosing when to engage, not being dragged. "Hi, Dad." His voice sounded rough. "Nora, your mother's furious." "I know," I said. She's not answering calls," he continued. "Jason left the reception early. People are talking." "I know," I repeated, because what else was there? Dad hesitated. "Your mother says she's cutting you off." A bitter smile tugged at my mouth. Cutting me off from what? Silence on the line. Then Dad's voice dropped. "From the family," he said. I leaned back against my kitchen counter, the coffee warming my hands. "Dad," I said gently, "I've been out of the family for years. They just forgot to tell me." He made a sound that could have been a laugh or a sob. "She's blaming you for everything," he said. "She says you're unstable. She's telling people you were jealous of Alyssa since you were kids." My jaw tightened, of course. "But Dad said," and his voice shook, "some people don't believe her. Jason's mother called me last night. She asked questions. She said what your mother did was cruel." I closed my eyes briefly. Dad continued, "And Nora, I need to say this, out loud." I waited. "I'm sorry," he said, voice cracking. "I'm sorry I let it happen. I'm sorry I stood there all those years and told myself it wasn't my job to interfere. It was. It was my job." Tears burned behind my eyes, hot and sudden. I didn't speak right away, because if I did, I might lose the steadiness I'd worked so hard to build. Finally, I said thank you. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was acknowledgement. The beginning of something honest. Dad inhaled shakily. "Your mother won't apologize," he said. "Not now. Maybe not ever." "I know," I said softer. "And Alyssa," he paused. "I don't know what Alyssa is anymore." That line, so raw, made my chest ache. Because somewhere under everything I had once wanted a sister. "What do you want, Dad?" I asked, the same question I'd asked in the parking lot. He exhaled. "I want a chance," he said. "Not to fix everything, but to do better." I stared at the steam rising from my coffee. Then I said the words that felt like a bridge, small, careful, but real. "Okay," I said. "We can start with coffee, just you and me. No Mom, no Alyssa, if you can handle that." Dad's breath caught. "Yes," he said quickly. "Yes, I can." We set a date Saturday morning, a diner halfway between Dayton and Indianapolis neutral territory. After we hung up, I sat at my small kitchen table and let the quiet settle. For the first time, my life felt like it belonged fully to me. But healing doesn't stop with one night. 2 days later, an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Alyssa, please read." My stomach dropped. I clicked it. The message was short, no greeting, no apology. Just a single sentence. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. If you ever speak to me again, it'll be to fix what you broke." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I began typing. Not an angry reply, not a defensive one. A boundary. "I didn't break you, Alyssa. I exposed what you did. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with honesty and respect. Until then, do not contact me." I hovered over the send button, heart pounding. Then I hit send. My hands didn't shake this time. That weekend, I met my father at the diner. He looked older, smaller, like the weight of denial had finally become too heavy to carry. We sat across from each other in a booth with cracked vinyl seats. A waitress poured coffee and called us Han. Dad stared at his mug for a long moment, then looked up. "I don't know how to be a better father," he admitted. I swallowed. "Start by listening," I said quietly. "Not defending, not minimizing, just listening." Dad nodded. "Okay." And so I told him. Not every detail, some scars don't need to be reopened all at once, but enough that he couldn't pretend anymore. I told him about the times Mom called me hard to love, about Alyssa mocking me for bringing store-brand food, about being treated like a burden for existing. Dad cried, quietly, no theatrics. When I finished, he reached across the table, hesitated, then placed his hand over mine. "I'm sorry," he said again, "and I'm proud of you." Those words, "proud of you," landed in my chest like warmth. Not because I needed his approval to survive, but because I'd wanted it as a kid more than I'd wanted toys or birthdays, or any of the things people think children crave. "I'm not doing this to punish Mom," I said. "I'm doing it to stop the cycle. I don't want to become like her." Dad nodded slowly. "That's the difference," he said. "You still care about what's right." As we left the diner, my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "This is Mom. You think you won, you'll regret this." I stared at the message for a second. Then I did something I'd never done before. I blocked the number. No grand speech, no dramatic response. Just a boundary. That night I sat on my couch with a blanket watching the rain tap against my window. I thought about how my mother's cruelty had been passed down like an heirloom, her own bitterness, her own need for control handed to Alyssa like a crown. And I thought about how easy it would be to keep carrying it, to keep reacting, to keep fighting. But revenge isn't really about making someone suffer. Not the kind that lasts. The kind that lasts is when you stop letting them shape you. Weeks passed. Jason filed for an annulment. I didn't hear it from Alyssa. I heard it from my father, who told me quietly over the phone like he was reporting a death. Alyssa moved back in with my parents temporarily. My mother blamed me for that too. But something else happened too. My father kept showing up. He called me once a week. He asked about my job. He asked about my life. He didn't bring up my mother unless I did. He didn't ask me to forgive and forget. He just stayed present. And slowly the anger that had been sitting in me like a stone began to soften at the edges. Not because my mother deserved forgiveness, because I deserved peace. One Sunday afternoon in early December, my father called again. "Nora," he said, voice hesitant. "Your mother, she wants to see you." My body tensed automatically. "I'm not ready," I said. "I know," Dad replied. "I told her that, but she asked me to tell you something." I waited. Dad inhaled. She said she didn't know how to be different, that she's angry all the time and doesn't know why. I closed my eyes, heart pounding. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing to vulnerability my mother had ever allowed. I took a slow breath. "What did you say?" I told her Dad said that being angry isn't an excuse to be cruel, and that if she wants you in her life, she'll have to learn. My throat tightened. "And what did she say?" Dad paused. "She didn't yell," he said quietly. "She just cried." I sat very still, letting that sink in. Then I said carefully, "If she wants to talk, it's with a counselor. Neutral place, no yelling, no blame. If she can't do that, there's nothing to discuss." Dad's voice softened with relief. "Okay," he said. "I'll tell her." That was the reconciliation, if you could call it that. Not a hug at the winery. Not a tearful speech. A boundary and a path forward. And that more than any revenge felt like winning. Because the lesson wasn't that my sister deserved humiliation. The lesson was that cruelty thrives in silence, and healing starts the moment you refuse to participate in the lie. If you've ever been the one shoved into the corner, given crumbs, told you were too much or not enough, I want you to hear me. You're not difficult for wanting respect. You're not selfish for setting boundaries. And you don't have to scream to reclaim your dignity. Sometimes the quietest no is the strongest thing you'll ever say. If this story hit something in you, if it reminded you of a moment you swallowed when you shouldn't have shared it with someone who needs it, and if you want more real-life stories about quiet strength, hard boundaries, and healing after betrayal, subscribe and stay with me. You're not alone.